The breaking point. The snow had been falling for 3 hours straight when James Thornton finally looked up from his laptop screen. His vision blurred at the edges, numbers and contracts swimming together in a meaningless jumble of black text on white background. The cafe had grown quieter, most of the evening crowd having retreated home before the storm worsened. Only a handful of tables remained occupied, scattered across the warm interior like islands of human presence in an ocean of empty chairs. James pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to relieve the burning sensation that had become his constant companion. 48 hours without sleep. Or was it 72? Time had lost meaning somewhere between the board meeting on Tuesday and the emergency conference call at 3 a.m. on Thursday. Now it was Friday evening, and he honestly couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten anything more substantial than the stale croissant he'd grabbed from the display case that morning. The cafe had become his refuge over the past 6 months. Not home, not the penthouse apartment in the financial district that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. That place was just somewhere to shower and change clothes between meetings. Not the office either, despite the mahogany desk and the panoramic view of the city skyline. That space carried too much weight, too many expectations pressing down on his shoulders like physical things. No, this cafe with its mismatched furniture and pretentious jazz soundtrack was the only place where James felt like he could breathe. Or at least, where he felt like he was supposed to be able to breathe. Lately, even here, his chest felt tight, his heart racing at odd moments, his hands trembling slightly when he reached for his coffee cup. The acquisition of Thornton Technologies by the global conglomerate NetCorp had seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime 18 months ago. At 34, he'd been the youngest CEO in the company's history, handpicked to lead the integration, promised autonomy and resources beyond his wildest dreams. The reality had been different. Endless meetings with executives who saw him as a temporary placeholder. Constant battles to protect his original team from corporate restructuring. Sleepless nights reviewing financial projections that never seemed good enough, no matter how many hours he spent perfecting them. His phone buzzed for the 40th time that hour. James ignored it, knowing it would be another message from his assistant about the merger documents that were due Monday morning. Or his mother, calling for the 3rd time this week, her voice tight with worry that she tried to disguise as casual conversation. Or perhaps his ex-girlfriend, the one who'd walked out 4 months ago after he'd missed their anniversary dinner for the 3rd year running. "Here's your receipt, sir." James grunted without looking up, his fingers already moving back toward his keyboard. Probably the manager wanting to hint that closing time was approaching. He'd dealt with that dance before, slipping an extra 50 into the tip jar to buy himself another hour of solitude. "You look tired." Something in the voice made James pause. Not the usual forced cheerfulness of service industry workers nearing the end of their shift. There was an edge to it, something raw and honest that cut through the fog of exhaustion surrounding his brain. "I'm fine," he said automatically, the lie so practiced it came out smooth as silk. He finally glanced up, ready to offer a polite smile and send whoever it was on their way. The woman standing beside his table wore the cafe's standard black uniform, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun. But it wasn't her appearance that made James forget what he was about to say. It was her eyes. They held something he recognized because he saw it every morning in his own bathroom mirror. A kind of desperate exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical tiredness and everything to do with carrying weight that no one else could see. "You look tired," she repeated, setting down his receipt with deliberate care. "Like my husband before he left." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning James didn't want to acknowledge. He should brush this off, make some joke about needing more coffee, go back to his work. Instead, he found himself studying her more closely. Mid-20s, he guessed, though there was something in her expression that suggested she'd lived more than her years should contain. A simple gold wedding band gleamed on her left hand, catching the cafe's warm lighting. "I wasn't asking if you're fine," she continued when James didn't respond. "I was making an observation. You look like someone who's forgotten what it feels like to be human." The bluntness should have offended him. James was used to carefully worded concerns from people who wanted something from him, veiled suggestions from board members who questioned his judgment, passive-aggressive comments from competitors who hoped he'd fail. But this woman's directness cut through all of that, reaching something deep in his chest that he'd been trying to ignore for months. "I don't think that's appropriate," he said, but the words came out weaker than he'd intended. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without asking permission. Up close, James could see the faint red lines around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she set his coffee cup aside. Her name tag read, Rebecca, in neat printed letters. "My husband's name was David," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "David Cole. He was an investment banker. 34 years old. Worked 18-hour days, sometimes more. He told me it was temporary, just until he made partner. Just until the big deal closed. Just until the next quarter's numbers came in." James felt his throat tighten. He wanted to close his laptop, to walk away, to escape whatever this conversation was becoming. But something kept him frozen in his seat, unable to do anything but listen. 3 months ago, Rebecca continued, December 13th, to be exact, David collapsed at his desk. Massive heart attack. The paramedics said he was probably dead before he hit the floor. His assistant found him 20 minutes later when he missed a conference call. The cafe's background noise faded until all James could hear was Rebecca's voice and the rapid pounding of his own heart. December 13th. He'd been in the middle of year-end reviews, preparing for the holiday shutdown that never actually shut anything down. It had been just another day in an endless string of days that all blurred together. "They told me at the hospital that his body had been showing signs of stress for months," Rebecca said. Her eyes were dry, past the phase of constant tears into something harder. Elevated blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, stress hormones through the roof. But David never went to the doctor. Never took time off. Never admitted that anything was wrong. She reached across the table and tapped the space bar on James's laptop, waking the screen. The merger documents glowed harsh white in the dim cafe lighting, rows of numbers and legal terminology that suddenly seemed meaningless. "That's what David was working on when he died," Rebecca said quietly. "A merger. He'd been so excited about it. Said it would make his career. Change everything." Her laugh was bitter. It did change everything. Just not the way he thought. James realized his hands were shaking. He clasped them together under the table, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't see how this concerns me." "Don't you?" Rebecca leaned back in her chair, studying him with unsettling intensity. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? When's the last time you ate a real meal? When's the last time you saw a doctor?" The questions hit like physical blows. James opened his mouth to lie, to deflect, to end this conversation that was spiraling into territory he wasn't prepared to navigate. But the words wouldn't come. "I can see your pulse from here," Rebecca continued, gesturing to his neck. "It's racing. Your hands are trembling. You've got dark circles under your eyes that makeup can't hide anymore. And I'm willing to bet you can't remember the last time you felt genuinely happy about anything." She was right. God help him, she was completely right. James couldn't remember the last time he'd felt anything except crushing pressure and bone-deep exhaustion. Even his successes, the deals that closed, the metrics that improved, brought only momentary relief before the next crisis demanded his attention. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally managed. Rebecca stood, picking up his empty coffee cups with practiced efficiency. "Because 3 months ago, I watched them lower my husband into the ground, and all I could think about was how many times I'd seen him sitting exactly like you are now. Exhausted. Driven. Convinced that everything would be worth it once he reached whatever finish line he'd set for himself." She paused at the edge of his table, meeting his eyes with devastating directness. There is no finish line, Mr. Thornton. There's just more work, and more pressure, and more excuses for why tomorrow will be different. Until one day, there isn't a tomorrow. James felt something crack inside his chest. How did you know my name? You're in here every day, Rebecca said simply. And you always use your credit card. James Thornton, CEO of Thornton Technologies. I looked you up after the first week. Wanted to understand what kind of person would choose work over sleep, over food, over their own health. And what did you find? Her expression softened slightly, the first hint of something other than grief and determination. Someone who's forgotten why any of this matters. Someone who needs to remember before it's too late. Unexpected confessions. Rebecca disappeared into the back of the cafe, leaving James alone with thoughts he'd spent 18 months trying to avoid. The merger documents still glowed on his laptop screen, but for the first time in months, he couldn't bring himself to care about them. Her words echoed in his mind like a warning bell he'd been ignoring for too long. He looked around the cafe properly for the first time that evening. Really looked. The other patrons were packing up, pulling on coats and scarves against the winter storm still raging outside. A young couple shared a piece of chocolate cake, laughing at something on one of their phones. An elderly man read a paperback novel, a content smile on his weathered face. A group of college students debated something with animated gestures, their textbook spread across a corner table. They all looked so alive. So present. When had James stopped being present in his own life? His phone buzzed again. This time he picked it up, scrolling through the accumulated messages. 47 unread emails. 12 missed calls. 3 voicemails from his assistant about the merger timeline. 2 from his mother. 1 from his younger sister, asking if he'd be home for their father's birthday next month. James realized with a sinking feeling that he'd completely forgotten about his father's birthday. Robert Thornton would be turning 65. His retirement was next year. How many birthdays had James missed while chasing success? How many family dinners, holidays, moments that couldn't be recovered or replayed? We're closing in 30 minutes, Rebecca said, reappearing beside his table. She'd removed her apron, revealing a simple navy sweater underneath. But you're welcome to stay until then. Storm's getting worse. You might want to wait it out. James looked at her properly now, seeing past the grief to the person underneath. She was younger than he'd initially thought, probably not even 30 yet. Too young to be a widow. Too young to carry the weight of loss he could see in every line of her posture. Can I ask you something? He said before he could stop himself. Rebecca hesitated, then pulled out the chair again. Sure. Why are you working here? I mean, your husband was an investment banker. Surely there was life insurance, savings. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. There was. Enough that I'll never have to worry about money. David was very thorough about planning for every contingency except the one that actually happened. She traced the grain of the wooden table with one finger. I started working here 2 weeks after the funeral. My therapist said I needed structure, needed to be around people. Staying home alone with all of David's things, all the memories, it was killing me in a different way. I'm sorry, James said, and meant it. Don't be sorry. Be smarter than he was. Rebecca's voice hardened slightly. David used to say the same things you probably tell yourself. Just one more deal. Just one more quarter. Just until we hit the next milestone. We had tickets to Paris for our 5th anniversary. Non-refundable, premium seats, the works. He died 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave. The pain in her voice was raw, immediate, despite 3 months having passed. James understood suddenly that grief wasn't something with a timeline or an endpoint. It was something you carried, learned to live with, incorporated into who you became after loss reshaped you. Did you ever tell him? James asked quietly. That he was working too much? Rebecca's laugh was hollow. Every day. Every single day for the last year of his life. But David was convinced he was doing it for us, for our future. He wanted to give me everything, the house in the suburbs, kids, private schools, vacations to exotic places. What he didn't understand was that I already had everything I wanted. I just wanted him. She pulled something from her pocket, a photograph creased from being carried and looked at too many times. She slid it across the table. James picked it up carefully, studying the image of a young couple on a beach somewhere tropical. The man was stocky and smiling, his arm around Rebecca's waist. She looked radiant, younger somehow, unburdened by the weight she now carried. That was our honeymoon, Rebecca said softly. Bali. 5 years ago. David took 2 weeks off, turned off his phone, actually relaxed for the first time since I'd met him. He told me that trip that he was going to change, going to prioritize us over work. Her voice cracked slightly. By the time we got home, he'd already scheduled 4 client meetings for that weekend. James handed the photograph back, unable to find words adequate to the moment. He thought about his own relationships, the ones that had withered from neglect. His college girlfriend who'd wanted him to move with her to the West Coast. His ex-fiancée who'd returned the ring after he'd missed their engagement party for an emergency board meeting. His most recent relationship that had ended 4 months ago when he'd forgotten their anniversary for the 3rd consecutive year. What about you? Rebecca asked, tucking the photograph away. Anyone waiting for you at home? No, James admitted. Not anymore. Not for a while now. Let me guess. They got tired of coming second to your work? The accuracy stung. Something like that. She said I was married to my job, that she felt like a mistress I only visited when it was convenient. I told her she was being dramatic, that she didn't understand what it took to succeed at this level. And now? James closed his laptop with deliberate finality. Now I think maybe she was right, and I was too proud to admit it. Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. David used to say the same thing. That the people who criticized his work ethic didn't understand what it took to excel. He wore his exhaustion like a badge of honor, competed with his colleagues over who could go the longest without sleep, who could close the biggest deals. She paused, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He won that competition. He worked himself to death at 34. The cafe's lights flickered as wind hammered against the windows. Snow had accumulated against the glass, creating a barrier between the warm interior and the hostile world outside. James felt suddenly claustrophobic, trapped not by the building but by the life he'd constructed for himself, walls of obligation and expectation that he'd built brick by brick until he couldn't see over them anymore. I had a panic attack last week, he heard himself say. The words came out before he could stop them, a confession he hadn't made to anyone, not even himself fully. During a presentation to the board. My heart was racing, couldn't catch my breath, thought I was having a heart attack. They called an ambulance. Rebecca's expression shifted to concern. What did the doctors say? I didn't go. Told them I was fine, that it was just stress, that I needed to get back to work. The presentation was important. Even as he said it, James heard how absurd it sounded. They wanted me to stay for observation, to run tests. I signed myself out. That was 3 days ago, Rebecca said. It wasn't a question. 5 days ago, James corrected quietly. I've had 2 more since then. Smaller ones. I keep telling myself it's nothing. Just like David did. Rebecca reached across the table, her hand hovering near his but not quite touching. James, do you want to end up like my husband? Do you want some stranger to find you collapsed at your desk, to call your family with news that will destroy them? Of course not. But even as he said it, James wondered if that was true. Part of him, a part he didn't want to examine too closely, wondered if that wouldn't be easier than admitting he'd made a mistake, than changing course, than disappointing everyone who expected him to succeed. Then why are you still doing this to yourself? It was the question James had been avoiding for months. Why was he grinding himself into dust for a company that would replace him within a week if he died? Why was he sacrificing his health, his relationships, his happiness for quarterly earnings reports that no one would remember in a year? Because I don't know how to stop, he finally admitted. This is who I am. This is what I've built my entire life around. If I'm not the successful CEO, if I'm not closing deals and beating projections, then who am I? Rebecca's eyes softened with understanding. You're whoever you choose to be. But you have to be alive to make that choice. The weight of her words settled over James like a physical thing. He thought about David Cole, a man he'd never met, who died chasing a dream that turned into a nightmare. He thought about his own reflection that morning, gray creeping into his temples at 36, shadows under his eyes that cosmetics couldn't hide, hands that trembled when he thought no one was looking. I'm scared, James whispered, the admission costing him something he couldn't name. I'm scared that if I slow down, if I admit I can't do this, then everything I've sacrificed will have been for nothing. The only way it's for nothing is if you keep going until you can't anymore, Rebecca said gently. David's death wasn't noble or meaningful. It was a waste. A stupid, preventable waste of a life that had so much potential. Tears finally appeared in her eyes, the first she'd shown during their conversation. Don't make his mistake. Don't make me watch another person destroy themselves for a success that means nothing if you're not alive to enjoy it. James felt something break inside him, a dam he'd built to hold back every emotion he couldn't afford to feel. His eyes burned, his throat closed up, and for the first time in years, he thought he might actually cry. Not from sadness, though there was that. From relief. From the simple human recognition that he was drowning and someone had finally noticed. I don't know where to start, he said, his voice rough. I don't know how to fix this. Rebecca pulled a napkin from the dispenser and wrote something on it, sliding it across the table. A phone number and a name. Dr. Claire Foster. She's the therapist who's been helping me, Rebecca explained. She specializes in grief and burnout. She helped me understand that David's death wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have saved him from himself. But maybe, if you talk to her, you can save yourself. James picked up the napkin, folding it carefully and putting it in his wallet. A small action, but it felt monumental, like he was choosing a different path than the one he'd been racing down for 18 months. Thank you, he said. For caring enough to say something. For not just ignoring another exhausted stranger. I couldn't ignore you, Rebecca said simply. You reminded me too much of David. And I thought, maybe this time, maybe I could make a difference. Maybe I could save someone the way I couldn't save my husband. The cafe manager appeared, apologetic but firm. Time to close. The storm had reached blizzard conditions outside. Rebecca helped James pack up his laptop and papers, their movements companionable despite having known each other for less than an hour, the road to redemption. The snow had transformed the city into something unrecognizable by the time James and Rebecca stepped outside. Wind whipped through the canyon of buildings, sending white curtains of powder swirling through the air. The few cars still on the road moved cautiously, headlights barely penetrating the winter storm. You shouldn't drive in this, Rebecca said, pulling her coat tighter. The subway's still running. I can walk you to the station. James looked at his luxury sedan parked at the curb, already buried under 6 inches of snow. The idea of digging it out, of navigating home through the blizzard, suddenly seemed absurd. I'll take you up on that. They walked in silence through the empty streets, their footsteps muffled by fresh snow. The city had gone quiet, the usual traffic noise and human chaos replaced by the whisper of falling snow and distant wind. James couldn't remember the last time he'd walked anywhere without his phone pressed to his ear, without his mind racing through the next meeting or deadline. It's beautiful, he said, surprising himself. Rebecca glanced at him, a small smile appearing. The city? In a blizzard? All of it. I'd forgotten to notice. James stopped walking, looking up at the snow falling from the dark sky, feeling flakes land on his face and melt. When did I stop seeing things? Probably around the same time you stopped sleeping, Rebecca said gently. She'd stopped beside him, her own face turned upward. David used to do this. We'd walk home from dinner, and he'd be on his phone the entire time, solving some crisis that couldn't wait until morning. I'd point out the moon or a street musician or anything beautiful, and he'd nod without looking, without really being there. James lowered his gaze to find her watching him. Do you regret it? Marrying someone like that? Never, Rebecca said immediately. I regret that he couldn't find balance. I regret that work consumed him. But I don't regret loving him, even though losing him nearly destroyed me. She started walking again, and James fell into step beside her. Love isn't something you regret. It's the choices we make around love that haunt us. They reached the subway entrance, warm air rushing up from below ground. James hesitated at the top of the stairs. He didn't want this conversation to end, didn't want to return to his empty apartment and his own thoughts. Can I ask you something else? He said. Sure. How do you do it? How do you keep going after losing someone like that? Rebecca considered the question carefully, her hand resting on the cold metal railing. Honestly? Some days I don't know. I wake up and the grief is right there, as fresh as the day it happened. But then I remember that David would be furious if I let his death stop me from living. He made mistakes, huge ones, but he loved life. He loved experiencing things, trying new restaurants, traveling to new places, meeting new people. She paused, pulling out the photograph again, looking at it with a mixture of love and pain that made James's chest ache. So I try to live for both of us now. I work at the cafe not because I need the money but because I need the connection. I'm taking photography classes, something I always wanted to do but never made time for. I'm planning a trip to Italy in the spring, the one David and I never took together. That's brave, James said quietly. It's survival, Rebecca corrected. But maybe they're the same thing. James thought about his own life, the narrow tunnel of work and obligation he'd constructed. When was the last time he'd tried something new? When was the last time he'd done anything just because it brought him joy? I used to paint, he heard himself say. In college. Landscapes mostly. I was never very good, but I loved it. Loved the way time disappeared when I was working on something. When did you stop? When I started the company. There wasn't time anymore. I told myself I'd get back to it once things settled down. James laughed bitterly. That was 12 years ago. Rebecca dug into her purse and pulled out another napkin, writing on it. There's an art supply store 3 blocks from here. Open until 9 most nights. Promise me you'll go there this week. Buy some paints. Don't think about whether you're good enough or whether you have time. Just go. James took the napkin, adding it to the one with the therapist's number. 2 small pieces of paper that felt like lifelines. I promise. Good. Rebecca checked her watch. I should get home. My sister's probably worried about me being out in this storm. You live with your sister? For now. She moved in a month after David died. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Probably saved my life, honestly. Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile James had seen from her. Family has a way of showing up when you need them most, even when you push them away. James thought about his own family. His mother who called weekly, worry evident in every word. His father who sent emails about fishing trips and baseball games, invitations James always declined. His sister who'd given up trying to include him in family gatherings after he'd missed the last 5 in a row. I've been pushing mine away, he admitted. Then stop. Call them. Visit them. Let them help you before it's too late. Rebecca extended her hand formally. It was good to meet you, James Thornton. I hope you take care of yourself. James shook her hand, feeling the warmth of human contact, the simple kindness of someone who cared enough to tell him hard truths. Thank you, Rebecca. For everything. For being honest when no one else would. We're all just trying to survive in our own ways, she said. Sometimes that means saving each other. She disappeared down the subway stairs, leaving James alone in the falling snow. He stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, staring at his mother's number. It was late, past 10 o'clock, but he knew she'd still be awake. She always was when she worried about him. The phone rang twice before she answered. James? Is everything okay? Just hearing her voice made his throat tight. Hi, Mom. I know it's late, but I was wondering if I could come home this weekend. For Dad's birthday. The silence on the other end lasted so long that James thought the connection had dropped. Then he heard a sound that made his heart break, his mother crying softly. Oh, sweetheart, she managed. Of course. Of course you can come home. Your father will be so happy. We've missed you so much. I've missed you too, James said, and realized it was true. I'm sorry I've been gone. I'm sorry I've been so caught up in work that I forgot what matters. You're coming home now, his mother said, her voice steadying. That's what matters. Are you okay, honey? You sound different. James looked up at the snow falling around him, thought about Rebecca and her dead husband, about the panic attacks he'd been ignoring, about the life he'd been wasting in pursuit of success that felt hollow and meaningless. I'm not okay, he admitted. But I'm going to be. I'm going to make some changes, Mom. Big ones. And I might need your help. Whatever you need, sweetheart. Whatever you need. They talked for 20 more minutes, standing in the snow while the city slept around him. James told her about the panic attacks, about the exhaustion, about Rebecca and her story. His mother listened without judgment, offering support and love and the kind of unconditional acceptance he'd forgotten existed. When he finally hung up and descended into the subway, James felt different. Lighter somehow, despite nothing having changed about his circumstances. The merger documents were still due Monday. The board still expected results. The pressure hadn't gone anywhere. But something fundamental had shifted inside him. He'd admitted he was drowning. He'd asked for help. He'd chosen, for the first time in 18 months, to prioritize himself over the job that was slowly killing him. The subway car was nearly empty, just a few late-night travelers scattered across the plastic seats. James sat by a window, watching his reflection in the dark glass. He looked terrible, exhausted and worn in ways that went deeper than physical tiredness. But behind the exhaustion, he thought he could see something else. A spark of determination. A decision made. He pulled out his phone and opened his email. The unread count had climbed to 63. Instead of reading them, James composed a new message to his assistant. Cancel all meetings for Monday. I'll be taking a personal day. Actually, make it the whole week. There's something I need to take care of. We'll explain later. The merger can wait. His finger hovered over the send button. This would create chaos. Questions. Disappointment from the board. Confusion from his team. All the things James had spent 18 months trying to avoid. He pressed send. The next email went to Dr. Claire Foster, the therapist Rebecca had recommended. I need help. Can you see me this week? It's urgent. Send. Then to his sister. I'll be at Dad's birthday. Can't wait to see everyone. Sorry I've been gone so long. Send. Finally, James opened his calendar and blocked out Saturday morning. Time to visit that art supply store Rebecca had mentioned. Time to remember what it felt like to create something just for the joy of it. When James emerged from the subway 40 minutes later, the storm had eased to light flurries. His building doorman looked shocked to see him home before midnight, actually taking the time to exchange pleasantries instead of rushing past. The penthouse apartment felt cavernous and impersonal, more like a hotel room than a home. Expensive furniture that interior designers had chosen. Art on the walls that investment advisors had recommended. Nothing that reflected who James actually was or wanted to be. Starting tomorrow, that would change. Starting tomorrow, he would begin the hard work of rebuilding a life worth living. But tonight, for the first time in months, James Thornton went to bed before midnight, set his phone to silent, and slept deeply without dreams. 3 floors below, a photograph sat on a simple dresser. A young couple on a beach in Bali, smiling at a future they thought they had time to build. Beside it, a new photograph from that evening, snapped quickly on a phone. 2 people in a cafe during a snowstorm, one speaking, one listening, both connected by the fragile thread of human understanding that sometimes saves lives in the most unexpected ways. Rebecca Cole slept that night with less pain than usual, knowing that perhaps David's death might prevent someone else's. That his story, tragic as it was, might be the wake-up call that saved James Thornton from following the same path. In the morning, the city would wake to fresh snow and new possibilities. James would keep his promise, would start the long journey of healing and change. Rebecca would continue carrying her grief while building a new life around it. Both of them would move forward, shaped by loss but not destroyed by it. Because sometimes the most important conversations happen between strangers in snowbound cafes. Sometimes salvation comes from unexpected sources. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get a second chance to choose life over the things that slowly kill us. The end was really a beginning, the way the best endings always are.